hour your clock strikes. Here, it's always Halloween. And I'm always your haunted host, Luce Tomlin Brenner. Welcome to Small Frights Friday. On these episodes, you'll hear a selection of curated calls from the All Hallows Hotline and letters from the EEEEKmail bag. If you would like to be involved in a future Small Frights episode, then give us a call at 802-532-DEAD or drop us a line at itsalwayshalloweenpodcast at gmail.com. Let's jump into our first call.
So I was calling you with my Halloween story. So I remember weeks before Halloween, my brother and I would plan out on graph paper, like write out and draw out the roads and stuff of our neighborhood and figure out the best way to like hit all the houses. We basically plan out our route. And I saw your post and I was like, oh my God. It brought back this memory of just my brother and I planning for like 2 weeks before Halloween. How are we going to maximize the candy? It was amazing. Thanks for the podcast.
Thanks so much for your call, listener. That is an adorable story, and it jogged a memory of mine that I actually used to do the same thing, and I have not thought of that in years. I'm an only child, so I did not have a sibling that I could partake in such festivities with, but I was obsessed with writing down what the best houses were. My mind was a steel trap when it came to Halloween candy and also Halloween decorations. As I got older, I got very resentful if a house did not decorate or participate beyond just giving candy. I was very demanding with my experience. So I would map out what houses had the best candy and which houses would decorate. And yeah, it would be just like you said, a couple of weeks leading up to it. It was all part of getting into the vibe of the season, right? Making it last beyond that one day or a couple of days. And gosh, I would just give anything to run across one of those maps that little Luce made. So I would love to hear if there's any other listeners that participated in this. I think that's a underrated activity that I bet a lot of us did. Thanks so much for calling. That was such a delight. Now we've got a letter coming all the way from New Orleans. Hi, Luce. I'm writing in from New Orleans, home of many a ghost story and the St. Louis above-ground cemeteries. I wanted to share a spooky book I just finished reading. It's called Rules for Vanishing by Kate Alice Marshall. It's a fictional story about a small-town ghost and a girl whose sister disappears in the woods. In order to save her sister, the protagonist and her 7 high school-aged friends must brave the darkness of the forest and the mysterious ghost road that appears there once a year. I cannot overstate how captivating, original, and creepy this book is. And despite its scare factor, it's also a really fun read. Rules for Vanishing is chock full of small-town folklore, ghosts, and one engrossing mystery after another. So if that's your jam, I highly recommend it. I'm a slow reader, but I finished this book within a day. I could not put it down. I love this podcast. It's really helping me get into the Halloween spirit. Thanks for listening, Maria. Maria, thank you for listening. What a wonderful letter. I appreciate your book recommendation so much. That is totally my jam. You nailed it. I love it when friends from high school are hunting ghosts or getting into any kind of mysterious, spooky happenings. I will trade you high school creepy book recommendations, which is you should read My Best Friend's Exorcism by Grady Hendrix. Now, this is also a book that I read not quite in a day, but I think in 3 days. One of my best friends got it for me for my birthday on a Friday, and then I had already finished it by Monday. I love Grady Hendrix's books. He has 3 others that I really like. We Sold Our Souls, Horror Store, and one that just came out, The Southerners Book Club Guide to Vampire Slaying. That one's kind of a mouthful. It took me a second. But My Best Friend's Exorcism, it takes place in the 80s, but it's not like overly nostalgic or like always just trying to hit those notes of like, remember the 80s? Which is really nice. And he, even though it's a man writing, he gets female friendships down so perfectly, so relatably. It reminded me so much of my best friend and the things that we did in high school and how we used to hang out in a cemetery because I grew up across the street from a cemetery. That's my origin story. And then it's just so intense, like it's so scary, but their friendship, they just like love each other so much and they're like fighting for each other's friendship in this way that's like both very emotional and sweet, but also like the actual supernatural aspect of it is also so scary. So it really hits on so many levels for me that it's like not just a scary book, but it's so emotionally resonant. And it has a little bit of 80s flair, which I was born in the 80s, so I appreciate that. So book recommendation for book recommendation. Thank you so much, Maria. And I would love to hear more about the St. Louis Cemetery. If you've been there, I've never had the chance to go to New Orleans. It's one of my dream vacation spots. I've always wanted to visit. For anyone who doesn't know, the St. Louis Cemetery is a famous above-ground cemetery, and people can't just visit. You have to pay for a tour because they get so much like vandalism and like creepy shit. So I've always wanted to go. I think it's really interesting. If anyone's seen American Horror Story Coven, they go to it. It's in Coven, and then also one of the characters, Marie Laveau, is actually based on a woman who's buried in the cemetery, Voodoo Queen Marie Laveau, who was born in the 1800s in the French Quarter and gained prominence as a voodoo practitioner in that time. Someone else who's buried in the St. Louis Cemetery is Homer Plessy, who was a activist who challenged segregation laws, and he was somebody who was like very monumental in abolition in that time period. And then Nicolas Cage, actually, still alive. I'm not trying to curse him. Bless and keep Nicolas Cage. He has a grave that he bought for, I guess, his eventual death that looks amazing. You have to look it up. It's this giant white pyramid, and he has the Latin phrase omnia ab uno on it, which means all from one. And it has people like, there's all kinds of conspiracies about how he like secretly practices voodoo. And like, of course, because it's a triangle, they try to connect it to the Illuminati. Or that he has all of his money like stored in the tomb. But like, come on, if you know anything about Nicolas Cage, it's that he spends all his money. He has got bad financial planners. So I want to go just to see Nicolas Cage's eventual gravesite. So yeah, I'll link a little article about it in the show notes so you guys can learn a little bit more about the St. Louis Above Ground Cemetery. If anyone's ever been, please write or call in. I'd love to hear about your experience. Thanks again, Maria. That was a fantastic letter, and I can't wait to check that book out. All right. Next, we have a call from someone who has a costume etiquette question. This is a question that really, really resonated with me, and I'm excited for you guys to hear it. All right, here we go.
Hi, I have a costume etiquette question. A lot of times the costumes I choose are a little more conceptual, and I never know how to deal when someone says, oh, you're whatever their interpretation of it is, and they're totally off base. Do I be the person who says actually and explains what it is, or do I just kind of go with their interpretation. Looking forward to your advice. Thanks. Bye.
Oh, is there anything more devastating than when somebody doesn't understand your Halloween costume? I just get driven up the wall by that. And caller, thank you so much, because this is something I come up against every single year, because like you, I want to always go above and beyond what anybody's asking for and pick something very specific to like a movie scene that not that many people have seen. And I get very bent out of shape when like people don't get it. So I like both. I go in with the costume ideas and I want to stump people, but then I also get like enraged if I do stump somebody. So that's a personal issue I got to work out. But more to your question, like, let's get some advice here for you. I have to say that my instinct is typically to be like, I guess everyone's too stupid. Do like the Enid coleslaw, like Ghost World response, and be like, I can't believe you don't get it, you dumb idiots. This is obviously what I am. But if I'm at a party where I like everybody, that's not the way to go. Every now and then, if you get stuck at a party or a bar or a situation that's, let's say you went with a pack of friends and you got outvoted and you're stuck around morons all evening, I say just like go scorched earth and be cruel about it, because if you're around idiots and they're trying to make you feel dumb because you just didn't pick like some, like, I don't know, pop culture event that just happened. Like, remember in 2011 and like everybody was Black Swan? I went to a party that couldn't have had more than 30 people and 3 people were Black Swan. And I was just like horrified for them. Anyways, this is me really showing my butt as a pretentious jerk. So if I pick something that's very specific and people don't get it and I'm around idiots, I tend to want to be kind of like, well, actually, blah, 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 blah. But that is not good advice necessarily, because it's not good advice if you want to have a good time. If you want to feel better than everybody, do it like that, and that will be cold comfort, because you won't have any friends for the rest of the evening. Here's my solid gold advice for getting along with anybody at any party who misinterprets your costume. So let's say you're dressed up like let's say you're doing Jeff Goldblum from The Fly, and somebody's like, oh my God, are you like Frankenstein? And you're like, oh, I'm so obviously Jeff Goldblum from The Fly. What I would do in that situation to maintain a friendly demeanor and high spirits all around is I'd say, oh my gosh, I'm not Frankenstein, but I love Frankenstein. That's one of my favorite movies. I love that you thought I was Frankenstein. I'm actually Jeff Goldblum from David Cronenberg's The Fly. Have you ever seen that movie? And then you're opening up an opportunity for conversation instead of shutting down conversation. And you're also complimenting them by being like, wow, great idea. Like, I love that. Sometimes somebody will have a really creative thought about your costume, and maybe even a better thought than what you are. And then I like to say something like, oh my gosh, that's a great idea. I wish that was my costume. Actually, I'm this. So that way, again, you're flattering the person, and you're also, telling them what you are. So don't just say, yeah, I am that, because that's not doing yourself any justice. And it's not a good way to you think you're keeping the peace, but what is that really? You've shut down any ability to even have conversation. You're just like, yeah, you're right. You're making yourself small on one of the most fun nights of the year. So answer in a way where you can not humiliate the other person unless they deserve it, and you cannot make yourself small. So a compliment, a little bit of acknowledgement that what they offered up is interesting, and let's say even if it's not interesting, just go with it. It's just a party for that evening, Unless, again, the caveat is unless everybody are really hardcore jerks, then you can go scorched earth on them. But I'm talking about regular people at a party that you're having a perfectly nice time at. Light flattery, acknowledge that that's a good idea, tell them what you actually are, see if they have any context for what you are, and try to have a conversation around it. You know, of course, I love film and television and books, so any opportunity I have to recommend anything just knocks my socks off. So, of course, if my costume is, you know, if I'm Linda from Halloween and I explain that, it gives me the opportunity to talk about how much I love PJ Souls, and then we could talk about Carrie, and then we could talk about Rock and Roll High School. And there's just so many opportunities to turn that light idiot into a new friend. So I hope that is good advice and that helps you out. I know we're not going to be going to many parties or bars this season. At least I beg of you, listeners. Let's take care of our communities as we're still recovering from the pandemic. But this is advice that you can keep in your pocket for the future. Next up, we have another letter. This one is in response to a caller who called into our very first Small Frights episode, Beggar's Night. If you haven't had a chance to listen to it, go listen to that one first. And here we go. Hi, welcome to the Halloween season. I just started listening and I came across the voicemail talking about nostalgia. So when I was a kid, I wasn't allowed to celebrate Halloween. I actually went trick-or-treating for the first time at 14. Oof. So I don't have the same nostalgia that others do for Halloween. When I grew up and moved out, I was able to celebrate Halloween on my own. Now I adore it. And because I don't have anything to build off of from my childhood, Halloween takes on a very special meaning for a different reason. I just love everything haunted, creepy, and scary. I love horror movies, and I love going to Spirit Halloween. I really love to binge horror movies and TV shows. I also enjoy handing out candy to kids and going to haunted houses and exploring pumpkin patches. I love all the Halloween smells of fun drinks and food. My new favorite tradition is watching all the Harry Potter movies in a row. I freaking love it all. So my short answer in response to the voicemail from the first Small Frights episode is yes, I think there can be more than nostalgia to Halloween, but my experience is different, so take what you want from it. Thank you. I really like your podcast. You kill me, lol, and your enthusiasm is contagious. Danielle. Thank you so much. I am so happy to hear that you feel that way. Some of these Small Frights episodes can get a little wacky because I get very excited. So I am delighted to know that it is contagious and hopefully in a good way. So I really appreciate that you had a different experience with Halloween, and I would love to hear from anyone else who didn't grow up trick-or-treating and now loves Halloween as an adult. I think that's really interesting. I don't actually know anybody aside from a few Jehovah's Witnesses that didn't celebrate. So I am fascinated by loving Halloween as an adult when you didn't experience it as a child. And I think that's such a good point, that we all make our own experiences and we all have control over how we celebrate a holiday and how it doesn't have to have anything to do with our childhood, because sometimes people don't have a nice childhood, so they're not nostalgic for that time, and that's okay. So I do think it's important to be able to separate childhood from traditions and let things be what they are as adults without forcing, a quote-unquote universal experience, which is just impossible. I mean, you said it yourself, my experience is different, but Danielle, all of our experiences are different. So I think that's such a great point. And I'm so happy that you freaking love it all, because I freaking love it all. And I'm just so happy you wrote in. So thank you for sharing that. Next up, we have a phone call from Jenny about movies. Here we go.
Hi, Luce. My name is Jenny, and I'm calling from upstate New York, and I just discovered your podcast yesterday, and I binged through it all, and I'm so happy that I found it and that you're making it. I love Halloween. It's my favorite time of year, and I immediately texted my sister because that's our thing is Halloween. So you have 2 new listeners. I wanted to call in and share regarding the Halloween movies. So 2 of my favorite Halloween movies to watch that are not spooky are the Disney short cartoon called Trick or Treat. It's Huey, Dewey, and Louie and a witch and Donald. I always watched it as a kid, and it's spooky and funny and has a song that just gets stuck in your head. It is now available on Disney Plus. So if people have Disney Plus, you can find it there. And then the other one is also Disney. It's the Ichabod Crane Sleepy Hollow cartoon. Again, it's got the spooky, it's got the funny, it's got some really good music, and that's also available on Disney Plus. So both of those are things that I grew up watching. They put me in the spooky mood. I just love them. And then honorable mention goes to a movie called Scooby-Doo and the Ghoul School. And it was just another one that I wound up, that I grew up watching, and it's Scooby and Shaggy go to a school for girls, and all of the girls are different monsters. It's super fun, not scary at all, but it will put you in the spooky mood for sure. So I'm wondering, if these are movies that you've seen, if any other listeners, are familiar with them. Thank you so much for the podcast. Happy Halloween. Stay spooky. Bye.
Jenny, your voicemail gave me such a thrill because you brought all of these memories screeching back for me. And that's one of the reasons I wanted to start this podcast, was for all of us all over the world to connect over our spooky traditions. I loved the Huey, Dewey, and Louie short, and I freaking forgot all about it. Like there's a GIF that's like really popular that I feel like people use a lot online. Of course, where else would they be using it? Of Huey, Dewey, and Louie dressed up in costumes. So if you've seen that GIF, it's really cute. They're like strutting in their little costumes. That is from the Trick or Treat short. So I saw that GIF, but I was just like this distant memory all the time. You know, like I had known I had seen it, but I wasn't like engaged enough to be like, where is this from? And so I'm so happy that you brought this up. I do have Disney Plus, so I am going to go rewatch it. That was one of those specials that used to play like every year with like the Great Pumpkin. And oh my gosh, Ichabod Crane, The Legend of Sleepy Hollow. What a classic. Now, you are correct that as adults, it's not super scary. But as a kid, that like really freaked me out. I was not down with decapitation as a child. So the idea that anyone could be headless was just like messing up my head. Like I could not deal. So I was pretty scared of the way that it ended, but I loved it. I watched it every year. But I used to have a lot of nightmares about headless people, because also as I talked about on the episode about movies, which was the same the Small Frights Beggars Night episode, where someone called in and asked if they were a Halloween poser because they didn't like traditional horror movies. So we talked about some ones that are still seasonably fun, but like appropriate if you don't like to be like totally blood curdled. So the other movie I talked about in that episode was Return to Oz, which also has a lot of headlessness. It's really difficult for me. I would love to hear if like decapitation in children's movies messed with you the way that it messed with me as a kid. Also, Jenny, I had not heard of the Scooby-Doo Ghoul School. Such a cute name. I do love Scooby-Doo, so I'm definitely going to check that out. I hope that's available somewhere. I'm going to Google around. Right now, I am creating a document of non-scary Halloween vibe movies because we've had so many conversations about this. So I'm creating like a large document. I'm going to break it up and do posts on our Instagram. Did I tell you guys we have an Instagram now? at Halloween, I don't know what it is though. It's at It's Always Halloween Podcast on Instagram. So I'm going to make a few little images with the different lists of movies so that can live somewhere and people can reference it. So thank you for finding the podcast, for binging it, for getting your sister into it. I love that you guys share this. And, feel free to write back, call back, and update me on what you guys are doing for Halloween this year. Thanks so much, Jenny. All right, next up, we've got another letter because we just talked about movies. This is another listener who wanted to write in regards to the woman who wrote in to ask if she was a Halloween poser. I haven't heard from her since. I hope that these have been helpful for you and that you feel better about your aversion to typical horror. All right, let's get into this letter. Hey, Luce. Found your podcast today and binged all your episodes at work. Great job. I really enjoy this list of non-horror Halloween movies every year. This is me taking an aside. There were a couple of them that I had mentioned on the last podcast, so I'm just going to say the ones that we haven't talked about yet. It's The Great Pumpkin, Charlie Brown, Young Frankenstein, The Corpse Bride, Casper, Monster House, Addams Family, Beetlejuice, Nightmare Before Christmas, and then he says in parentheses, in my opinion, you can watch this October 1st through December 24th. Edward Scissorhands, parentheses, not sure if this counts. Clue, parentheses, not sure if this counts. And then this one I haven't seen in a while, and I'm not sure how well it holds up, but Dracula, Dead and Loving It. I also enjoy the scary ones, but this is in response to your callers a few episodes back. P.S. If they're feeling a little brave, I'd like to throw in Sleepy Hollow. Tom. Tom, thank you so much for that letter. I agree that Sleepy Hollow is kind of like on the edge. I had also recommended on that episode Jennifer's Body, which, again, it has a few jump scares like Sleepy Hollow does, but in general, it's more about like atmosphere. So I think a really fun double feature would be The Legend of Sleepy Hollow, the Disney Ichabod Crane animated version that Jenny recommended. And then, as it gets a little darker, put on the Tim Burton one with Johnny Depp and Christina Ricci. What an iconic duo. And then I do have to go back just to say, I definitely appreciate your opinion, and you are probably in the majority. I personally cannot watch Nightmare Before Christmas until after Halloween, until it's Christmas time, because I think you can make Christmas scary, but you can't make Halloween Christmassy. And while I definitely appreciate Christmas, I aesthetically am not interested in it. And I do not want its like warm, cheery jolliness to infect my like obsession with like death and dying. They just don't go together aesthetically for me, and it makes me feel insane to hear or see Christmas colors or Christmas music in October. So go watch it as much as you like out there, listeners, if it makes you feel good. I personally will not be watching Nightmare Before Christmas until December 1st. Also, same thing with Edward Scissorhands. It does take place during Christmas, so while it is spooky, I have to lob that into my spooky Christmas movies, which, because this is an all-year-round Halloween podcast, we will be talking about spooky Christmas movies when we get to December. So don't worry, there'll be time for it. And then Clue, I would say not exactly creepy. It is a murder mystery, so definitely throw it on the pile. Why not? I did watch Dracula, Dead and Loving It recently, actually, because I was obsessed with that movie as a child. I saw it before I saw any iteration of Dracula, and I like had all these lines memorized, and it's so funny because it's a Mel Brooks movie from like 1994. There's so much like heaving breasts in it, and I was just like, ha ha ha, I'm a child. Which, you know, obviously nothing wrong with breasts at all, but like, it's just so funny. There's so many sex jokes in it that just went completely over my head. But I think it's still a really funny movie, and having watched it again after now I've consumed like every iteration of Dracula possible, it is such a good parody, and all the actors are so funny, and so I definitely would recommend Dracula, Dead and Loving It. Thanks so much for writing in, Tom. I appreciate it. All right, now we have one call left over, and I just want to do a little content warning for sensitive listeners. The next call is about Halloween decorations gone awry, and there will be mentions of death and suicide. So feel free to skip ahead a few minutes if you need to. I don't want anyone to hear anything that'll trigger them or, give them a difficult rest of the day. We're here for fun. But this is a really interesting call about a really interesting urban legend. So that's why I am including it. All right. So this is your warning, and the call is going to play now.
Hello, All Hallows Hotline. I just wanted to call. It's kind of a twofer. It's a story from when I was a little kid, and I went to the Bates Motel Haunted Hayride in Gradyville, Pennsylvania. It was like the first haunted hayride in our area. This was back in the 90s, and my cousins and I went, and the day after, supposedly, there was a dead body found in one of the scenes of the haunted hayride. And it was supposedly that somebody had committed suicide in the scene intentionally, and it was like a really unfortunate thing because people thought it was just part of the display and kept going and didn't notice until the next day when they were cleaning up. Of course, now as an adult, I realize this is probably all not true and it's an urban legend because I feel like every hometown either has this with a haunted hayride or a Halloween display in the neighborhood. So I guess this is where my question comes in. Where does that urban legend come from? All right, this is Jen. Thank you so much. Bye.
Jen, thank you so much for that call. That sounds like such an interesting haunted hayride. And I actually looked it up, and that hayride specifically doesn't have any connection to someone committing suicide in the hayride or anyone dying on the hayride. There are no reported instances that I could track down on the internet. Perhaps they did an incredible cover-up that only 5th and 6th graders in the Philadelphia area were privy to at the time, and now since it's disappeared. But I believe that, like you said, this seems like an urban legend that, everybody has at every town. But I believe that's because there's actually a bit of truth that is in this urban legend that this actually has happened before. So going to Snopes.com and looking for this urban legend, I discovered that people have committed suicide in a public manner and have been mistaken for Halloween decorations. There was an instance in October of 2005 of a 42-year-old woman who hung herself, and everybody assumed that it was a Halloween decoration, and she was basically there all day. Similarly, in October 2009, there was a decomposing body of a 75-year-old suicide victim who sat undisturbed on the balcony of the deceased home in Marina del Rey, California, for several days because the neighbors just assumed that it was part of a Halloween display. So these are more modern accounts, but I believe there have been, if this happened twice in the last 20 years, I'm sure something like that also happened earlier in the 90s. And then there's also been a ton of instances of young teenagers, this is so sad to me, who have been trying to, either at a hayride or at their own home haunt, have been trying to hang themselves as part of a Halloween display. And because it's such an impossible thing, it's something that you just should not mess with. It's something that's just so dangerous, but you can't necessarily know that as a young person, that these kids have tried mimicking, pantomiming, hanging themselves, and then have inadvertently done so. So there are many instances of that on Snopes.com as well. I will link those articles in the show notes. Like I said, obviously they are very sad and very heavy, but I do think it's important to acknowledge that this has happened. And in this way, we can honor and remember those who died in this tragic, awful way that nobody should have had to go. So, Jen, thank you so much for calling in. I think that's really fascinating. It's something I hadn't actually looked into before, but it was an urban legend that I had heard about. And I think if you do some digging on a lot of local urban legends that you experienced as a kid, you will find that they are based in some shred of truth. A lot of times, however, the truth isn't nearly as exciting or ghoulishly enjoyable as the urban legend. So sometimes you might want to just stick to fiction. With that being said, I do want to encourage our listeners, if you're struggling or you need some help, all of us need help sometimes. You're not alone. And I encourage you to call the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline. I have had to call crisis hotlines before. I've found them to be very helpful. So please reach out if you need to. The number is 1-800-273-8255. That number again is 1-800-273-8255. You can also contact the crisis text line by texting HOME, 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 to 741-741. That's HOME to 741-741. Thanks so much, everyone, for listening to another episode of It's Always Halloween. If you have a Halloween query or memory that you would like to share with us, call into the All Hallows Hotline at 802-532-3323. That's 802-532-DEAD. Or you can write me an EEEEKmail at itsalwayshalloweenpodcast@gmail.com. I'll do my best to include you in an upcoming episode. If you have any responses to anybody's calls or letters today, feel free to write in. I'd also love to hear anybody who celebrates Halloween outside of the United States and what your customs are, and maybe any advice for new ways to celebrate the holiday this year. I would also love to hear any ghost stories from you all. However, I would love them to be like personal, not just, don't tell me a creepypasta. I read all the creepypastas, I will know. But, tell me a personal ghost story. I want to do an all ghost story episode the day before Halloween on October 30th. So that's your prompt. Go to it. It's Always Halloween is researched, written, and performed by me, Luce Tomlin-Brenner. The editing, theme music, and sound design is by the magnificent Pete Burns. Thanks, Pete. You can follow the podcast on Instagram at It's Always Halloween Podcast. And you can follow me on Instagram and Twitter at LTB Comedy and Pete at Mittenberries. If you're on Apple Podcasts, please subscribe and write us a little review so that other like-minded ghouls can find us. Thank you again for listening to It's Always Halloween. And come back next time, unless you are stuck in a crazy Halloween movie marathon and you just can't rip your eyes away from the TV. I don't blame you.